Hello and welcome to the EdjSports NFL Podcast for Week 18. The regular season is finally complete, and boy, was it a fun one on Sunday. I'm your host, Ian O'Connor, Senior Data Analyst here at EdjSports, and joining me, as always, is our VP of Data Science at EdjSports, Scott Brown. Scott, I imagine you had as much fun watching these games as I did yesterday. I know I was busy from basically 1 o'clock until a little bit after midnight with these games.
Yeah, it really delivered, Ian. It was a crazy week. I don't think as fans we could have asked for, any better entertainment out of these games. It was really something. I think obviously the jewel amongst all of these games was definitely that Sunday night game, Chargers Raiders, which we'll get into here in just a moment. But you had that San Francisco Los Angeles game. You had that Pittsburgh Baltimore game go down to the wire, go into overtime and need to be decided at the end there. It was, with all the playoff implications at play in a season where there was, a lot of parity across the NFL, a lot of teams with about as many wins as they had losses. It definitely came down to the wire and was exciting down to the very last play. So, yeah, I had a lot of fun watching the games yesterday and taking a lot into our discussion today to discuss what we found most interesting and most exciting about those games.
Yeah, and a lot of fourth down goes, a lot of big plays. Like I said, it seems like I was busy running the model nonstop. I don't think I've been this busy on a Sunday all year. This might have been the most exciting Sunday, not only with the playoff implications, but the way the games went. But you mentioned the San Francisco Rams game, Arizona, Seattle. It was pretty crazy seeing a couple times in that game, San Francisco and Arizona, I believe, tied the game up within minutes of each other. And then they each got, and then the Rams and Stafford Wilson threw interceptions like within minutes of each other. And then late in the game, Stafford hit Kupp to take the lead, and Russell Wilson ran it in for the lead for Seattle within minutes of each other against like those two games that really hinged on each other for those teams. Was just like step in step with each other. Just like one thing would happen, it was like immediately something would happen in the other game. So pretty fun to see, especially that late window. Had a ton of excitement. You mentioned the night game. Before we get into kind of going deeper into these games, just want to remind you all listening that we are available on the EdjSports Podcast Network and our EdjSports YouTube. The podcast network is available on your podcast platform of choice. Don't forget to give us a 5-star review to help us grow our audience on those podcast platforms. We will have updates with our coach rankings, taking a look at some of the coaches who have been fired already. We'll get to those at the end of this show as well, just to cover those a little bit. But we'll have some updates, again, looking at some of the best and the worst decisions from this past week again. Some of those that maybe didn't make our top fives. So now let's just, I guess, get right into it, starting with, you mentioned, Scott, that crazy game Sunday night, best game of the week, probably best game of the entire season, just all things considered, with the big comeback, overtime, the fourth down conversions from the Chargers, the fact that if this game ended in a tie, thanks to the Colts' loss to the Jaguars, both teams would have made the playoffs. The Steelers would have been out. There were a couple of Steelers fans at the game. They kept showing on the broadcast that just about lost their minds at the end of the game when it looked like it may end in a tie. So had pretty much everything you could ask for. Brandon Staley, who's been one of the most aggressive coaches this season when going forward on fourth down. He is number one in our CCI rankings, which is Critical Call Index, which ranks coaches based on their ability to maximize their team's win probability on fourth down decisions by making the correct call. Is mired in some controversy yet again, just a few weeks removed from that Kansas City game where he went for it 4 or 5 times in that game. They only converted a couple and only got points off of 1 or 2. This one, I think, is even bigger than from that Kansas City game. So ended up being actually our 5th best decision of the week. And people obviously disagree with this. They're going to continue. There are a lot of people that will probably never come around on this. But at third quarter, 8:55 left, still a lot of football left to play. They're only down 3. They have 4th and 1 at their own 18-yard line. This is something, we see not many coaches still coming around to. Cliff Kingsbury actually did go for it yesterday on a 4th and 1, I think at his own 20. They did convert, but this one, Staley went for it. It was a 4.7% increase in pre-snap win probability. Again, good for 5th best of the week. Did not work, though, and that's part of the reason we're still talking about this. I think if they convert this and move down the field, if they score, even if they convert and end up punting, the fact that they failed on here, I think, is the biggest pull on making this such a negative storyline.
Yeah, I think people are playing results, right, Ian? as you sort of highlighted here, we like this call. I think it's more of the same from Brandon Staley. He's definitely in his rookie season as head coach made a name for himself to be really aggressive in the right spots and in spots where a lot of other coaches don't have a history of being aggressive in those same spots. And I think we see time and time again it kind of it is the right call, even though you have to ignore the results, right? The call is the right call before exactly what plays out on that fourth down. So yeah, I mean, 4th and 1, I think in general, like your conversion rate is just so high on these 4th and 1s. It's gonna take quite a lot of other situational factors to overwhelm that single factor to swing this into a into making a conservative play call the right one. So yeah, we really like this decision. I think even though Austin Eckler wound up getting stuffed on the play, it gave his team the best chance to win in a really crucial game for them, right? This was everything for the Chargers. They needed a good result in this one in order to make the playoffs, and so why sit back on your heels and try to wait for a good opportunity later in the game when you have this one presented right before you here already in the second half, about midway through the third quarter. And it's just a 4th and 1. So, your offense is certainly the strong point of that team. And, give them, keep the ball in their hands, give them a chance to go out and make a big play for you and continue your drive on down the field. Obviously, you're already trailing at this point. It is only a 3-point game, but you definitely want to be more aggressive minded before like the game has the potential to get out of hand. And who knows, you might not, based on how things play out, you might not get really a better opportunity than this one to really make an impact on the game with your decision making. So yeah, I think Brandon Staley really did the right thing here, even though it didn't work in their favor.
Yeah, and you mentioned, it just being a 4th and 1. That is one thing that's also been a topic of conversation with this. Is there are obviously, and we acknowledge there are different fourth and 1s. We talked before we came on the show here. There's a 4th and short that's maybe inches, maybe 4th and a foot. You've got your mediums that's right around a 4th and 1, and then you've got some long ones that can be 4th and 1.5 yards. That's counted as a 4th and 1. So this situation, NFL Next Gen Stats actually was able to determine that it was a 4th and 1.31 yards. So 1.3, which comes out to an expected conversion rate from them on that, they say is 59%. Based on the risk reward from this, the Chargers would gain 9% by converting. They would lose 8% in win probability on a failure. So that comes out to a required conversion rate of 47%. So normally we've talked a 4th and 1 is close to 70%. Even with the 4th and 1.3 being at 59%, that expected conversion rate is still higher than that required conversion rate by 12%. And then looking at it, Scott, you mentioned the Chargers, being very strong on offense. They came into this game number 3 on offense, while the Raiders are only 23rd. So that 59% is probably even a little bit higher for the Chargers, considering how strong they are on offense, going against a defense like the Raiders, who have struggled. And that is even looking at the fact that they lost 2 yards on the play, considering, the failure there. If they fail just at the line of scrimmage, that required conversion rate goes down a little bit. The difference isn't a huge amount when I looked at it, but still, we do like the call on this one. You mentioned too the game, before it gets out of hand, that the game did kind of get out of hand on them after this. This was, as much as there's really no way to factor momentum into the model. But, I think when you watch a game, you can definitely sense when there is, momentum for one team or the other. The momentum, it definitely seemed to shift on this play. The Chargers defense was able to hold up, limit the Raiders to a field goal, but then it kind of all got out of hand from there. Ended up going down 15, and the Chargers scored a touchdown with about 4.5 minutes left on a 4th and 21, where they converted that to score, and they made the right call on the extra point. They went for 2, because with 4 minutes left, if you kick the extra point, you're down 8. If you get the ball back, there's probably going to be a couple minutes gone by the time you're able to get down the field to score again. If you score with 15 seconds left, 30 seconds left even, and you have to go for 2 and you don't get it, you've got basically no time. You've got to recover an onside kick and then get a field goal. Now, Michaels on the broadcast had said, I don't like knowing that I need 2 scores with 4 minutes left. And we had kind of talked about it in one of our tweets, say, it's better that way than knowing hey, I need a score and there's not enough time left, or there's very little time left and I need that onside kick and a score. So really it's something we've seen a few times this year. John Harbaugh did it. I think Cleveland did it at one point, that we're really seeing coaches come around to that down 15, especially down 15. The down 14, I think most people kind of understand, at least from a fan's perspective as well. But the 15, people don't really understand as well, because they say if you don't get it, you need two scores. But it is still the right call based on kind of that explanation, Scott.
Exactly right. Yeah, you want the information earlier than later, and the reason why, like the value to that information, right, is that the sort of strategy you use to call plays, the strategy you use to manage the clock, is then informed by that information, and there's more you can do with it, right? So like maybe that means at the margin you call a different set of pass plays, the ones that are more likely to preserve time. Or maybe that means right, that if you know you need a touchdown and a few, at least two more possession. If it's a two possession game, right, then there are things you can do on third and fourth or excuse me, like second and third and longs, right, when you're in field goal range by just taking the field goal right then, as opposed to, as you say, not finding out until there's 15, 20 seconds left in the game. You then need an onside kick. And you can't even, at that point, it's like you pretty much only can run a Hail Mary, even though you don't need a touchdown. So there's just more, you have more flexibility. There's more you can do with that information. I understand from Al Michaels' sort of folksy perspective that I don't like the way that feels, but it is really, if you're trying to win the game, it gives you the best chance across a broad set of scenarios, as opposed to just sort of wanting to shake the eight ball and not find out what the answer is until the very last second. So I think, once again, another correct decision by Staley, one that, as you mentioned, I think more folks are coming around to across the league, but certainly he seems to be pretty on top of it there in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and then they converted the 2-point conversion, so they got down to 7. Were able to get the ball back, and then one of the craziest drives I think you'll ever see, one of the craziest drives I think I've ever seen, was Chargers get the ball back at their own 17-yard line. I think a little over a minute left. They do still have, I believe it was 2 timeouts. It may have been 3 timeouts left at that point, and they get 1st and 10 at their own 17, then 2nd and 10, 3rd and 10, 4th and 10, and they convert. And so they get another 1st and 10. A 2nd and 10, a 3rd and 10, another 4th and 10, and they convert. They had 3 4th and 10 conversions. I think one of them was converted by penalty. March down the field, get a pass completion down to the 12-yard line that was originally called incomplete. Ended up being overturned. Great call. 1 play left, 2 seconds left from the 12, and Justin Herbert hits, I think it was Mike Williams, in double coverage as time expires. And of course, in old Chargers fashion, it would have come down to a missed extra point from Dustin Hopkins to lose the game by 1 point. But no, they were able. He came through. It just went inside the left upright, I believe. Either that or the field goal in overtime, but ended up forcing overtime. Raiders get a field goal on the first possession. This one was kind of interesting because it ended up being a 4th and short on here in this situation for the Raiders. Was it a 4th and 3 at the Chargers 22? 7 minutes left in overtime. This would normally be a pretty big error, but because a tie is a win for both teams in this situation, Scott, it's probably not as big of an error. Might not even be an error at that point because the model, doesn't know how to account for the fact that in this Week 18 last game of the season, a tie is just as good as a win for both teams.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think under normal circumstances here, where there's a sharp difference between a tie and a win, that field goal attempt on 4th and short becomes bad. Like we don't like it. But as you sort of zoom out here a little bit and think about, well, usually the way we treat these things is a loss is 0, a win is 1, and a tie is worth half. But that's clearly not the case for these two teams. I think much was, or some, depending on where you look, there was something made of the fact that both these teams could make the playoffs with the tie. So really, I think the right thing to do is to value ties as effectively wins, as you mentioned. And it's a bit, difficult for us to just like kind of strip that out of our model, to remove it from our model, which is, I think, a very sort of interesting entry point for research, honestly, to maybe take a look at this offseason. specifically for these final, week of the regular season games and these scenarios that come up, even though this one was very, very, we thought was very rare heading into the week. Of course, it plays out this way. But yeah, I mean, back to this decision here to kick the field goal on the opening drive. Under normal circumstances, we don't like it, but when you factor in that for the Raiders, a tie is as good of a win for them. I think we're much less critical of it. I think, usually when you kick a field goal here, the chances of a tie happening in overtime go way, way up, which, normally is bad or at least less good than winning for you. But since it's as good as a win for you, it certainly shrinks it ought to shrink the size of the air to this decision. So, we're cognizant of that. It's hard to put an exact number to it, like how much of a difference does it make? But yeah, we do. We're, I think, willing to step back a little bit and say that we can wrap our heads around making that decision in that moment, and for that reason, you will see that it's not featured as an error this week on our top 5 list.
And so the Raiders get the field goal, need a score to keep overtime going, and then we have our third most impactful play on the way down. Justin Herbert, again, another fourth down, this one 4th and 9, their own 26. They have to go for it, obviously, down 3 in overtime, second possession of overtime. And he completes another pass to Mike Williams for a 47-yard gain for the first down. It's a 41.4% increase in win probability, which is the third most impactful play from the weekend's action. So that would set up a Chargers field goal, which would tie the game at 32. Again, we mentioned both teams could get in the playoffs in a tie. I don't think either team was really playing for the tie. It seemed at the end, the Raiders, it kind of looked like it. The post-game comments from Derek Carr, he said, that they were playing for the win the whole time. The reason that came up is because there was 38 seconds left on the clock. The Raiders had, I think it was 3rd and 4 at the Chargers around the 40-yard line, 41-yard line, I think it was. And it looked like they were content running out the clock. They'd run the ball in the previous 2 plays. That maybe they were going to go for a tie. But on 3rd down, it did look like, they were still going to try and get a first down. Maybe they weren't going to throw the ball, but they were still going to try and get the first down because you want to win the game. Because one thing that I think people aren't taking into account is the fact that if this game ended in a tie, the Raiders would be the 7 seed and have to go play Kansas City. As it is, they get the 5 seed or the 5 seed, I believe, and they play the Bengals. Both teams are dangerous. We've seen what the Bengals did. The Bengals beat the Raiders. The Bengals just beat the Chiefs. But I think they were wanting, that's a big thing to want to avoid Kansas City. But the way it went, the Chargers call a timeout with 38 seconds left. And, a lot of people are wondering, was it kind of a bad move that the Raiders were settling for a tie? But I think it's one of those situations. At first thought, I thought it was, hey, typically you see that it's like, all right, the defense, they didn't like what they had on the field, or they didn't like what the Raiders were doing. They didn't match up well, and they don't want to give up a first down or a touchdown and lose the game at that spot. So I don't think the timeout was really a bad decision if that was the case. And Scott, I think that was the case. Again, that was kind of my first thought, was that, hey, you see with time winding down, especially when you're in a tie game, you see the defense call the timeout. You're like, why are they calling a timeout and saving time? I think in this situation, there was something they didn't like on the field with that play.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. The point you mentioned about the incentives. It's not just about making the playoffs; it's also about the position where you fall. In the seeding, and obviously you would avoid having to play a stronger team than maybe a weaker one. Those are excellent points, and I think it really showed up, in this game that really, even though both these teams' incentives were maybe just to tie or to play for a tie, it really didn't play out that way at all. I think the timeout by Staley there is certainly interesting and worth discussion. Like you though, it's really hard to know. It's hard to know exactly which way to go on that one because we don't know what's going through the mind right on the other sideline. Through the minds of the coaches on the other sideline, right? That's just something we can't know. What we can know is what they've done to this point in the game. and very clearly to that point in the game, they were playing for the win, right? There was no situation up until that point that would indicate that, oh, maybe we're just going to kind of sit on it, or be overly conservative just to kind of limp this one across the finish line and call it a tie and be done. So I think under those circumstances, I would be less critical of the timeout as being like, oh no, what are you doing? I think if the timeout was taken with the mindset, oh, like, hey, we're getting a look, our sort of be it a personnel matchup or a scheme matchup, is one that we don't like, and we just assume that that they're doing everything they can to beat us on the other side, then I think I'm certainly less critical of that timeout there. Um, if it's maybe a bit different if you think that the Raiders are just going to come out on that next play and basically kneel on it, but like I just mentioned, I don't think we received any indication up until that point in the game that they would do that. So uh,
And they
yeah,
still
I
ran the
mean,
ball on the next play. They picked up the first down, but they still chose to run the ball, kind of play it a little conservative, but still try and get the first down because of what you mentioned kind of before we hopped on here, that they were running the ball very well and they were getting big chunks with Josh Jacobs. So they still kind of play it conservative, but still running it. They've been running it well and they stuck with that and still ran the ball.
yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, certainly running's more conservative than passing, but yeah, that Chargers D, I think, just really sort of couldn't come up with a stop there on the run down the stretch, and that is what really burned them. I think maybe if they were able to, shut down the run, here or there a couple times, maybe we see the Raiders, kind of change course a little bit, become more conservative, right? But be it that they had so much success on the run, with the run on that, in those final plays, there really wasn't much for them to do other than just keep running it, right? Why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it's not only is it the more conservative of our two choices, but it's also been effective. So uh, yeah, unfortunately for the Chargers, they just couldn't come up with the stop that they desperately needed there. And yeah, unfortunately for them, they're going home. No playoffs.
Yeah, and as we know, Daniel Carlson hit the field goal um, to win it, and some people said, hey, they lost by 3 if Brandon Staley doesn't go for it and fail on 4th down. Um, that they win the game, the kick at the end of the game wins it, or they don't go to overtime. But as we've said before, you can't just subtract 3 points from a score from something that happened midway through the third quarter and say, all right, the game would have played out the same and they would have won by 3 in the end. So that's not a valid argument. That's a very that's a big fallacy, I guess, if I'm saying that correctly, to think that way and think. But as you mentioned, Scott, the Raiders in the playoffs, making the playoffs for the first time since 1960s, a team to make the playoffs after replacing their coach midseason. So pretty good feat there for the Raiders with everything they've gone through with John Gruden first, and then the Henry Ruggs situation where they lost one of their biggest playmakers. To come through, and Bisaccia had really turned into an aggressive coach here in the last few weeks too. He had a 4th down decision in this game where they ended up scoring a touchdown on the drive. Last couple of weeks has had some of our better calls. So after kind of a stretch mid-season where he was really conservative and fell down our coach rankings, has been really good and got them into the playoffs here in these last few weeks. So I feel like we could talk about this game all day, but we'll move on to the other big game with playoff implications: the Steelers and Ravens. The Steelers, beneficiaries of this game not ending in a tie. If it had ended in a tie, the Steelers would have been the team that would have been left out in the cold for the playoffs here starting this week. Both of these teams, though, Steelers and Ravens, needed a win to stay in playoff contention. They both needed Indy to lose. The Ravens, I believe, also needed New England to lose, which didn't seem like would happen, but did happen. So this one was big the way it played out. Led to a large number of interesting coaching decisions. All 5 of our worst decisions of the week come from this single game. And we'll start with John Harbaugh, who had a very uncharacteristic day, to say the least. Started the game really strong, had a good call really early in the second quarter. 4th best of the week, had a 4th and 2 on the Pittsburgh 45. They were down 3-0 at this point. Call a fake punt. 4.7% increase in win probability. The fake punt ends up being an incompletion. We like the decision to go for it, as we always kind of say. it's much better to leave your offense on the field. I think it's kind of hard because you can look at it you can look at it two ways. You have the element of surprise where maybe they're caught off guard. In this situation, though, I think Cook was throwing into double coverage, if you can call it that. There were two gunners on the receiver. But also, if you leave your offense on the field, there's not really the element of surprise, but you've got people who are used to handling the ball. And we are accounting for the fact that it was Tyler Huntley in the game, not Lamar Jackson, but they play a similar game. Huntley, we've seen him very mobile, can also throw the ball pretty well. So this one, we like the decision to go for it, but it's hard with fake punts too. It's hard to know too what the success rate is on a fake punt because they're so different. And there's also the sample size on those just isn't very big, right, Scott?
That's exactly right. Yeah, there's really, I think this is something we could study a little bit more closely in the offseason, certainly, but it's, as you say, it's a pretty small sample size problem. I think, what we do know is that 4th and 2 midfield, it's a go. I think Harbaugh knows this. We can, I think, quibble over what the optimal way to go for it is. I think, leaving some allocation of your play calls to fakes, I think is fine. I think maybe a more interesting question is like, what percentage of the time should you be calling a fake here, just to sort of keep special teams, the opposing special teams, honest. I would guess it's probably very, like, if you're sure you're going to go, then it's probably something you only want to do every so often, right? Maybe like 1 in 20 or something like that. But regardless, I think we the way we look at things here at Edge, we'll credit John Harbaugh here for just electing to go for it on this 4th down. And yeah, who knows? I think you bring up a good point, which is to question that if Lamar Jackson was playing yesterday, maybe they just keep the offense on the field. It's more straightforward. So yeah, I mean, I think those are sort of interesting what ifs, but the easiest thing for us to analyze is how it played out, what happened, and based on what they did, they decided to go for it. It wound up not working out again here. So we could play results and say, oh, that was a dumb call, but like, even in spite of the outcome, this was the right decision. And we think John Harbaugh made the right call here. And unfortunately for John Harbaugh, that was just about the only bright spot we can really point to in this one, because he really uncharacteristically, just really clammed up, I guess. And maybe it was that, a tie was better for the Ravens and the Steelers. Maybe it was that he felt less comfortable, with his aggressive go for it strategy now that Lamar's not under center. Really hard to know, but at least, in terms of the way that things played out time and time again in this one, it was really a head scratcher what happened to him. And how, he just really, I think, dropped the ball time and time again yesterday.
Yeah, and you mentioned, a tie in this one. All the attention of the tie was on Chargers Raiders heading into the weekend action. And there really wasn't much. It's like this game ended up going to overtime. Until it got to overtime, I don't think anyone really knew what happened if this game went to a tie. Turns out Scott Hansen on Red Zone informed us that both teams would be eliminated with a tie. So that kind of, I think, comes into play on a play a little bit later on that we'll get to. First, as you mentioned, John Harbaugh just really uncharacteristic, having a lot of errors in this one. He had our 5th, 4th, and then our number 1 worst call of the week. Number 5 was midway through the 3rd quarter, 4th and 2 on his own 42, leading 10-6. Would expect to see him go for it in this situation a lot of times. Nearing midfield, a 4th and short, again, having Huntley, who's mobile quarterback, having Latavius Murray in there, having, Mark Andrews, guys that's come up big for them lately. Chooses to punt, though, 4.5% error. The number 4 was another punt, 4th and 1 on his own 23 with 8 minutes left in the 4th quarter. They were leading 10-6 still at this point. So this one would have been just as controversial as the Chargers one we discussed. But we've seen Harbaugh go for it, when trailing, even in a close game and not even in desperation mode, on his own, 25, 30, a couple times this year. But here, again, decides to punt. It's a 6% error. And then the number 1 worst came with just 1:17 left in the game. They had 4th and 2 on the Pittsburgh 28. This time at this point, they're trailing by 3. It's 13-10 Steelers. Harbaugh decides to attempt the field goal, which again is surprising to me. Knowing now that, a tie isn't really good for either team. At this point, still with overtime to play, you mentioned earlier, Scott, it's not as big of a deal, but still, this ends up being a 14.6% error. Again, worst call of the week here. And this one is just, we talk about all the time, and you can probably talk a little bit more about that, the temporary win or a kind of a moral victory of, all right, we tied the game up, but there's still going to be a minute 13 seconds left in this game.
Yeah, which is just, plenty of time for your opponent to go down, only needing a field goal, get in field goal range, have a reasonable shot at converting it and beating you. I mean, Boswell is on the other sideline is a good kicker. He's no Justin Tucker, but he's a very, very good professional kicker. And
especially late in the fourth quarter and overtime, I think he is like perfect over the last however many years, or maybe has only missed one. They mention it kind of every game that the Steelers play close. But yeah, it's very good, very reliable in the clutch.
Very reliable in the clutch. Ben Roethlisberger obviously has a storied career in, a storied history of coming back at the end of games. So, I know in his old age, and this is sort of his last hurrah, that that maybe you would want to maybe discount him a little bit, but I think you want to be careful about doing that. Anyway, I think it's just really, really sad, I think, honestly, to see John Harbaugh, who has really been out in front of things. I mean, we have to give credit where credit is due. Has really been out in front of the league as far as fourth down aggressiveness, dating back several seasons now, of really sort of, being on the front line of realizing that these are the right calls to be going forward here. And just to see him, you listed these, these last three decisions just in a big moment when, his team really needed it, and he really could demonstrate what it means to make the right decision regardless of the circumstances, right? Or given the circumstances, but regardless of I think the moment, right, or the pressure of the moment, and to just really see him time and time again kind of clam up, I guess, for lack of a better term, and really kind of be it punting the ball or kicking a field goal here, where the right thing to do is keep the offense on the field. You're able to, I think, pick up this first down most of the time, and then you kick the field goal, right, where you can just bleed the clock down and not give your opponent the chance to really realize a good amount of equity here on a subsequent drive. Obviously, things played out regardless, in his favor, even though the decision was wrong. Well, at least at the end of regulation, the Steelers weren't able to capitalize with that time remaining, which actually I think leads us into our next decision, our next bad decision, and this time it came from Mike Tomlin. So can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, and you mentioned Harbaugh kind of when they needed him most, needed when Baltimore had to win to get in the playoffs. The other ones were the Chargers loss, Indy loss, and Miami had to lose or tie. So Miami won, so that would have messed it up anyway. But when he needed it, yeah, kind of puckered up a little bit. Very surprising from him. Like I said, has been on kind of the forefront of analytics and has been around for a long time. But yeah, moving on to Tomlin, you mentioned is coming up to our next one. We've criticized him plenty on our podcast, on our streams, on Twitter, because he's been very conservative. He's dead last in our CCI metric. He's dead last in our coach rankings, in part due to the Steelers' struggles on the field. And that may, some of you out there listening may think, struggles like they made the playoffs. Yeah, they backed into the playoffs. They did not play very well. They've had some really bad games, have won some ugly games. Yes, they've got the wins. That's what matters, I guess, in the end, is if you can win the game. But they just, in terms of their actual on-field performance, the underlying metrics, they have not done well. And Tomlin, no one has been worse. So more of the same from him. And this one had our second worst call of the week. And when we look, we're actually going to cover two of his calls. It's interesting, the distance down or the distances, I guess, in field position. Scott and I covered these beforehand about how surprising it is what happened on these two. The first one's 4th and 1 on the Pittsburgh 44 with 44 seconds left in regulation. 4th and 1. Pittsburgh has one timeout. Baltimore still had two timeouts, but he decides to punt. And this is one of those, I think, was 4th and less than 1 yard to go. So a very short 4th and 1. The punt is a 10.4% error. So again, going conservative, 4th and short, you hate to see it, but not super surprising from Tomlin. But then the surprise comes in overtime. We get our third worst call of the week. 2:28 left. 4th and 8 on the Baltimore 41. I believe it's the opening possession here. Or no, sorry, not the opening possession. Second possession of the game. Baltimore got the ball first, but Pittsburgh's now got the ball. 4th and 8 on the Baltimore 41. And he decides to go for it, which, yes, is an error. This is another one like last week with Cincinnati where we did not like the decision to go for it. We actually liked the field goal. It would have been, a 59-yarder, which Scott mentioned, Boswell, very good kicker, very clutch, very reliable late in the games. There was some weather concern here, a little bit windy, nothing like we saw in Buffalo, that first Buffalo New England game. A little bit of rain. It wasn't a downpour. But this one, I think there's a little bit more to it. Scott, we were kind of talking beforehand. You want to talk through this one a little bit, maybe these two kind of together, how we said we're surprised that he went for it on the 4th and 8, yet punted on the 4th and 1.
Exactly. So, I think that first decision you highlighted, really, really bad. Just initial reaction is it's really bad. Not really surprising from Tomlin. Fourth and especially if it's 4th and inches from Pittsburgh's 44 seconds left, you're just in prime. It's a prime go for it spot. Pick up the first down. You only need maybe a couple more first downs, 20-ish more yards to get in reasonable field goal range, and be able to seal the deal in regulation. As time expires, and that's it, right? And you mentioned a tie you can't be playing for a tie in any way, shape, or form in this one if you're, and so yeah, I mean it's just a very clear go in my mind, and yeah, the overall impression is not terribly surprised, even though it's very clear here that going for it is the right call. Now, when we move to the other decision, it's obviously unconventional, right? It's very unconventional and rare that we disagree with going for it on 4th down and favor, what we typically call more conservative options on 4th down. Sort of the more interesting thing, or to me though, before we get into that, is how this decision really doesn't make sense when consider like it's not consistent with the earlier really conservative behavior, right? So this is like almost an overcorrection or something, because we talk about this time and time again. At the end of the regulation, they had a 4th and 1, really call it a 4th and inches, decide to punt from midfield. And then in this spot here in overtime, they have a 4th and 8 and decide to punt from midfield. It's like, why were you, if a tie is bad, and we already know this, why go for it on the 4th and 8 and not the 4th and 1, right? And especially because, the situations parallel one another very closely. Pretty much in both cases, you can be reasonably assured that a field goal, well, that basically a field goal wins the game, right? With 44 seconds left, there's really not going to be any time in a tie game for your opponent to do anything else in that first one. And then in that second one, we know at that point, based on overtime rules, that the field goal wins it. So, they're inconsistent with one another. They don't make sense. It sort of seems like somebody's guessing there or something like that. So, I think that's certainly worth noting that, they sort of need to maybe think through these things a little bit more closely to really understand, what they're doing on 4th down. Now, shifting over and thinking about, that overtime call, the one that we think is the third worst of the week. And it's very, very rare, right, that we like kicking a field goal over going for it. And I think here when we see these come up, we definitely take pause. We definitely dig into it and try to understand. Okay, what's at play here? What's going on? Do we have this wrong? And after we did that on this particular play call, I think we stand by it. We have to consider. Okay, it's 4th and 8. There's 2.5 minutes left in overtime on Baltimore's 41. We like the field goal. Field goal here from this distance is 59 yards. Boswell's career long is 59 yards. He made a 59-yarder last year in Dallas, and certainly has had a very strong career as we mentioned earlier on in the show. We think he's capable here, and that's just based on the data that we have. I think if you're privy to information that we don't have, and maybe that he's dealing with a nagging injury, or pre-game he came out and attempted kicks from that distance and he didn't have it. Well, that's information that we unfortunately don't know. So, but we are, I think, willing to consider that. Hey, that's a possibility, and if that's the case, then obviously I think we feel less strongly, right, about this decision. Unfortunately, we just kind of can't know that. Um, but we do stand by, I think, in general, the approach to analyzing this one. Our estimate of the error here is 6.4%. So it's likely that, the things I just mentioned work to reduce the size of that error. Maybe, so maybe it would fall a little bit, but I think in general, we still think kicking the field goal here, as long as you think Boswell has a fair shake at making it, then I think we like kicking the field goal here. Um, yeah, so it's certainly, very strange. These types of errors only come up so often. We saw, Brandon Staley have one of these earlier on in the season. One of these happened, I think, in that Cincinnati versus Kansas City game from a week or two ago, where coaches are actually too aggressive in going for it. And yeah, this winds up being another in that category for us.
Yep. And Brandon Staley, as you mentioned, was the one back in week 2 or week 3 where they went for it. We disagreed. They converted and ended up beating Kansas City. So, the he went aggressive in that one. And with this one with Tomlin too, we kind of mentioned this before we hopped on here, talking through everything, saying that a tie doesn't help them. So if I was thinking maybe Tomlin was going to punt because a 59 yarder, you mentioned Boswell can make it, with a chance to win, give that a shot. But maybe the weather concern. So maybe he didn't punt either. The punt would have been even worse by our model's numbers, because with 2:28 left, if you punt it to Baltimore, if they take up most of the clock but don't score and you tie, it doesn't help you. So that could have kind of helped Tomlin be more aggressive in the situation, knowing, hey, I've got to go for the win here. If we don't, nothing else helps us. A tie doesn't help us. Obviously, a loss doesn't help us. So that could have factored into it, but still surprising. I agree with you. Surprising to see him go for it on the long one, but not go for it on the short one, the 4th and 1. But this also had one of the most impactful plays of the week. Got bailed out, I guess, if you will, by Big Ben. On this play was also one of our most impactful at number 4. He completes a pass to Ray McCloud, who makes a great catch just past or right at the marker, and kind of falls forward. It was a 38.5% increase in win probability that would set up the game-winning field goal in overtime from Boswell. Kicked it early on. I think it was like 2nd and 12. They kicked it just to go ahead and get it over with. The win for the Steelers kept their playoff hopes alive, eliminated the Ravens, and then, as I mentioned, they would back in with the Raiders win. So a couple really exciting games from yesterday, 2 overtime games. Couldn't have asked for much better football. But now we're going to transition into our top 5, starting with the top 5 most impactful plays. So again, the play is basically the biggest win probability swings, either positive or negative. Number 5 is Packers versus Lions. At this point, Jordan Love is in the game, only a minute 23 left. The Green Bay had actually taken the lead on a pass from Jordan Love to Josiah DeGuara, who took it like 60 yards to the end zone for a touchdown. What was surprising in this one to me was you're starting to wonder if, I was wondering if the Lions even try to win after that, because with Jacksonville winning, at that point up big and looking like they're going to win, a Detroit loss would have given Detroit the first pick in the draft. So I was kind of wondering, are they even going to try? And then it's like, well, were they even trying on that touchdown? Because it looked like he just broke through a couple people without even being touched and just went all the way to the end zone. Nonetheless, Detroit did try. They had taken the lead. So at this point, it was kind of a last gasp effort for the Packers. They're down 4. He's intercepted, again, minute 23 left. Cost them 31.7% in win probability. The Lions would tack on a field goal to make it a 7-point game, and Green Bay unable to overcome that. But game didn't really matter for Green Bay. Obviously, they had the 1 seed. Rodgers was in, played a little bit, threw a couple touchdowns. I think went over, got Devontae Adams, the franchise single-season receiving yards record. Rodgers went over 4,000 yards again in his career. So good day for the most part for the starters. And then Green Bay wasn't able to come away with the win. And Detroit stuck with that number 2 pick in the draft. But I don't think they'll be too mad about getting the number 2 pick still and beating Green Bay. Is always fun for those teams.
Yeah, maybe Green Bay was really the team doing the tanking here. Playing the long game, intentionally throwing the ball, to the Lions, so that way they deny the Lions the first overall pick.
Yeah.
You never know.
That's true. Didn't think about that, but yeah, that wouldn't that be something? But a good too. Another thing for the Packers, kind of you mentioned playing the long game too for their benefit as well, getting David Bakhtiari back on the field for I think 27 snaps. Zadarius Smith has been has been cleared to return this morning. That came out, so he'll be back. So a lot of good. The Packers look to be getting healthier, which isn't something that typically happens at this point in the season. Usually, you've lost a lot of guys, maybe have a big injury ahead of the playoffs, but Packers are in pretty good shape with that 1 seed. And again, that's the number 5 most impactful play. Number 4 we covered was the Steelers Ravens just a moment ago in overtime. Big Ben's 4th and 8 conversion. Number 3 we covered as well. I'm sorry, that number 4 was 38.5% again. Number 3 covered as well. Justin Herbert's 4th and 9 conversion in overtime was 41.4%. Number 2, pretty simple, not much to it. Matt Stafford's interception in overtime after San Francisco got a field goal, taking up like 7.5 of the 10 minutes in overtime to take a 3-point lead, and they intercept Stafford on an underthrown ball, dropping the Rams from 46.5 down to 0%. They did still win the division with Arizona's loss, but they are now the 4 seed instead of the 2 seed, so big implications there on that one. And then number 1, this comes from Saturday. This was a huge play. I was actually surprised, Scott, that it was this big of an impact and win probability, because the Broncos were only up 1 on the Chiefs. The Chiefs, pretty big favorites, I think, in this one, five or I think it was 5.6 points. Not huge favorites, but close to a touchdown. We actually did have this one a little bit closer, I believe, at like 3 points. But still, Broncos up 1, 2nd and 2 at the Kansas City 9, with only 8 minutes left in the game, looking in good shape to get a first down, potentially add a touchdown to get this to an 8 or 9 point game. Maybe even, if they have to, or not have to, if they end up settling for a field goal in a 4th down situation to make it, a 4-point game. But Melvin Gordon gets the handoff and is hit pretty much right as he takes the handoff, fumbles, and then rookie Nick Bolton picks it up for Kansas City and takes it back 86 yards for the touchdown. So this took Kansas City, increased their win probability by 59% and dropped the Broncos from 77.3 down to 18%. Again, I ran this one a couple times Saturday to make sure that I had everything right, because it seemed pretty low for the Chiefs prior to that snap. Didn't seem low after the fact. Obviously, they go up, get the 2-point conversion to go up 7. But this was obviously a huge play, one of the biggest plays of the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, just absolutely massive swing. I think from like an analysis standpoint here, right, you go from having the ball in a super valuable part of the field where your expected points are very high. It's probably something like 4 points or probably even more at this point. In the goal line there. And then you have the absolute nightmare scenario occur. Either could be a pick six or strip fumble, return touchdown, and it just you go from basically going on the door or knocking on the door to be up 8 points to now trailing, and you're already, I think, a significant underdog in this game. The Broncos are. You really don't know at this point in the game, with only about 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter, if you're ever going to have how many chances more you're going to have to really put points on the board. This has certainly got to be the best one, and you just absolutely have nightmare scenario play out where you give it up and give points to the Chiefs, because it ain't going to get any easier after that when you're playing defense against the Chiefs in a comeback situation. So just understandably, just a massive swing. Obviously, it's really jarring to see a number that big when it's still half the fourth quarter left. But yeah, this is it winds up being as billed, just an absolutely crazy swing.
And that's at least the second time. I think probably just the second time that's happened to the Broncos this year. They had one against, I think it was the Eagles, like a 4th and 1 at the Philadelphia 20 or 16, and went for it. Made a right call. Again, that was a 4th down this past week against the Chiefs, was 2nd down, but went for it. I think picked up the 1st down, but fumbled. And I think it was Darius Slay that picked it up and took it back for a touchdown. So just some bad luck this year for the Broncos in some of those plays when looks like they've got a chance to win some games. Vic Fangio was let go yesterday after 3 years and no playoff berths there. So be interesting to see what happens there in Denver. It seems like, though, I mentioned this on the head coach rankings last week, and we won't get into it too much here, or maybe when we get to the head coach section at the end of the show today. But seems like they just need a quarterback at this point. They've got really good a lot of weapons on offense. They have a really good defense. So it'll be interesting to see who comes in as head coach and then who they're able to get, or if they're able to get a quarterback, maybe a Russell Wilson, or I'm thinking Rodgers is going to stay in Green Bay at this point. You never know. Anything can happen. Seems like things have gotten better over the season, but winning fixes things a lot of the time. So we'll see when it gets to the offseason. There's no football being played, but again, that is the number one number one most impactful play of the week at 59.1%. Now that we've got the win probability swings out of the way, we're going to move in to our top 5 best play calls. Again, don't forget to rate, review, subscribe to all of the Edge Sports shows on your preferred podcast platform, as well as our Edge Sports YouTube channel. So now that the biggest win probability swings are done, talk about our top 5 best fourth down decisions. So the biggest impact on pre-snap win probability. Number 5, number 4, we already covered. Number 5 was they're tied for number 4. Chargers, Brandon Staley, that 4th and 1 at the 18 that pretty much no one agrees with, but was a 4.7% increase in win probability. The Ravens tied with number 4, that 4th and 2 at the Pittsburgh 45 was also a 4.7% decrease or increase in win probability on the best calls. Number 3 and number 2 are both the Colts, both 4th and shorts early in the game. The number 3, they're down 7-0 early in the second quarter, and they go for it from the Jacksonville 35 on 4th and 1, and they convert. But the decision to go for it was a 4.8% increase. And then number 2, also the Colts, 4th and 2 at the Jacksonville 42. This is much earlier in the game with only 6 minutes left in the first quarter, so only about 9 minutes into this game. Jonathan Taylor is stopped short, gets only 1 of the 2 yards needed, is a 5.5% increase in win probability. And number 1, pretty straightforward, especially from the Chiefs. Pretty big number at this point in the game. I think even though it's getting late, 2 minutes left in the third quarter, Chiefs are down 4. It's a 4th and 1 at the Denver 48. It's an 8.7% increase in pre-snap win probability. Again, that's a pretty big number with still 17 minutes left in the game.
Yeah, that is a big one. But I think even though the swing is big, it seems like a pretty clear go for it decision there. I think pretty much all the factors of this one line up. You have 4th and 1. You have midfield here on the Denver 48. You're trailing by 4. You also have Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs offense to play with. So it's an absolute slam dunk. Those Colts decisions, once again, obviously the outcome was really poor for them yesterday, and they sort of imploded at the worst absolute time. It seemed like they were strong position to make the playoffs, but obviously when you lose to the worst team in the league, when you need a win, hard to say that they deserve to make it there. But at least from Coach Reich's perspective, I think he can feel, even though his team didn't perform at the level that they needed, those decisions that you highlighted at 2 and 3 were just more of the same from him. Clear goes, and he was able to make the right call in those situations, even though both of them were early. I think if that Baltimore Pittsburgh game had played out a little bit differently, it probably would have it might have kicked him out of the top 5 list. Frank Reich, that is. If John Harbaugh just showed up to work yesterday and made the right calls, because both of these Indianapolis calls were, I think, of lower impact than the errors, which we highlighted earlier from that game. So, but yeah, I think once again, just to kind of put in a period on this one for the regular season, since we're talking about best decisions. I think broadly speaking across the NFL this year, coaches I think get a high grade in generally speaking. As you look at the entire body of work, that they are definitely incorporating analytics more and more into their decision making. It is good to see that if you're out there fighting the good fight for your team as a fan, to have your coach make the best decision for your team to win, that it looks like they're heeding the message. They're getting it. And even though there's still work to be done, that in general it looks like progress is being made. And that's, as a fan and sort of an intelligent fan of the game, it's good to see.
Yep, absolutely. And hope to see more, next year, hopefully some of these decisions for Brandon Staley and other coaches that fail as we get in the playoffs. It'll be interesting to see how some of these coaches do if they, get more conservative with so much more on the line, or if they stay aggressive, and how that transition or translates into next season as well will be interesting to see. I'd imagine that the trend would continue up with coaches becoming more aggressive, and as just offense becomes more prominent and more dominant in the NFL, it seems, and scoring being very important because there's not a whole lot of defensive battles, it seems like, anymore. You have a handful of them. But yeah, just the need to score points and understanding that your chances of converting are much better than what people have really thought in the past will be really good for the game moving forward, I think. So that will do it for the top 5 best decisions. Again, don't forget about our site, EdjSports.com. It's EdjSports.com, and our app that's available for both iOS and Android. Get NFL news, get pregame betting analysis for every game, including our fair value spreads, our fair value totals, where we think those lines and totals should be versus what it is in the market. You can get all those. Regular season's over. We'll still have that for the playoffs, though, up through the Super Bowl, and then come back next year as well to be able to start from week 1. And now, moving on to the top 5 worst, we've covered everything in here. I won't run through all these again. They were all the Ravens and Steelers decisions. One that doesn't show up that I want to talk about just briefly is from the Broncos-Chiefs game. It was kind of a hot topic on Saturday, was the Broncos down 7, having 4th and 9 at the Chiefs' 13-yard line with just about, I think, like 4.5 minutes left, 4:40, choosing to kick the field goal. We do have this as an error. It ends up being only a 0.3% error. And part of that reason is when I kind of looked into it a little bit more, saying, all right, we looked earlier from the Chargers one. What was their required conversion? Like, what did they need to convert at to make this worth going for it? And what would kind of be expected? And it turns out the risk reward makes it a 35.8% required conversion rate. And when looking at, historical conversion rates, and this is looking at them, around, kind of in that middle of the field where it's a little bit more open, a 4th and 9 will be converted around 34% of the time. As you get down in the end zone, Scott, I'm sure it becomes much more difficult to convert, 9 yards when you're inside the 15. Like, everything is just so much more condensed. You almost have to throw the ball, especially on a 4th and 9. You can't expect to pick up 9 yards on a rush. I can't imagine, but makes it, end up being not as bad. With 4.5 minutes left, yes, I don't think the Broncos ever got the ball back and ended up losing the game. But in that situation, 4th and 9 with it being that close, you're down 7. It's different from the one we saw with the Patriots a few weeks ago when they were down, I think, 13 and chose to kick the field goal or whatever it was. It's a tough one. We still think it's an error. They were pretty low in win probability either way, but only being a 0.3, I think it's not as bad as it looks. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free to disagree on that one as well.
No, I think, I think, like, on the face of it, that one's a bit surprising, but for the reasons you mentioned, I think, that makes sense. The bar just gets raised pretty high when you're down in that part of the field. And, 4th and 9 is hard to, there's still, I think in general, people, when they first look at this, are surprised at how high the conversion rates are on 4th and 9. But, certainly for the Chiefs, for the Broncos here, it's going to be, it's with their offense, it's just an uphill battle, right? And so it winds up being sort of a muted error. It doesn't work out for them. The Chiefs are able basically to just take the ball on their subsequent possession, sit on it, and ride it out to victory.
So that will do it for our top 5s. Again, though, that Broncos decision does not come in the top 5, but they were all the Ravens and Steelers that we covered earlier in the show. Now, before we finish up, just want to move on one quick update. Black Monday is underway, as I'm sure you're aware. So far today, already Mike Zimmer and Matt Nagy have been let go from Minnesota and Chicago, as well as Brian Flores from Miami. Vic Fangio was let go yesterday. Vikings GM Rick Spielman, if I'm getting that name right now, I'm drawing a blank on that. If that's his name, has been let go. And Bears, your people, Bears general manager Ryan Pace has been let go as well. So it brings up questions of kind of what's next in Chicago. I'll kind of, I guess, let you eulogize, if you will, as a Bears fan on this. But one question, kind of the to include on this one too is watching Good Morning Football this morning. Kay Adams and Peter Schrager and Kyle Brandt talking. One of them mentioned, what's next for Justin Fields? Not only Chicago, like you're going to be bringing in a GM and a head coach who didn't draft him, and all the time you hear organizations and people say, well, we actually had a second round grade on this quarterback, not a first round grade. Like Fields, I think was first round all around. But as high as they took him, you may have someone come in that, wasn't high on Fields and maybe wants to trade for a veteran quarterback or wait and draft. The quarterback class this year isn't great. Maybe wait till next year, but kind of as a Bears fan, I guess I'll just open the floor to you and kind of hear your thoughts on all the moves that have been made today and what could be next.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So I guess I'll start by saying I think we had to be careful as fans. We got to remember, to have some empathy for these coaches, for these GMs. I don't want to dance on anyone's graves here. I know, certainly you have, sharp, competent people doing the best they can. And, I don't want to judge the person too harshly. Here on this show, I think what we really want to focus on are the decisions, right? And it's not just about being right. It's about helping to share what we know and how we think about things. So that, if there's a coach listening or a GM listening or an owner listening, or, even just a fan, just in terms of how they consume the game, how can we understand the decisions that are being made and have an informed opinion about, what's a good decision? What does a bad decision look like? I think, Matt Nagy, certainly had some success that first season, and things were pretty lackluster after that, or certainly not up to the expectations that were then set. Be it fair or not fair in the subsequent seasons, and then certainly this season was a step backwards for sure. I think there was some optimism early on around how aggressive he could be on fourth down, how he'd be leading progressive-minded integrating, progressive offensive concepts into that Bears offense for the first time in a long time. And ultimately, it just really didn't play out. I mean, I think this is a pretty well-traveled road here. I don't really have a lot of interesting things to add here. We certainly covered some of his decisions on this show. I think, not terribly surprising. The rumors had obviously been leaked out at times over the past few weeks. And I guess we can just sort of leave it there, and for others with their hot takes on Matt Nagy and how they're happy to see him go or what have you. I actually want to take a little bit more time though to talk about Ryan Pace. So Ryan Pace had a longer tenure than Nagy did in Chicago, and once again, I don't know, no personal knocks against Ryan Pace. I think once again, you have another person who's had success in his career, is competent, and was doing the best he can. But there are just some decisions that, as a fan, of the Chicago Bears, just constantly, really, I don't get it. And I think there's, and specifically, it's really draft day decisions, which we'll be looking to shortly here after the NFL playoffs. Ryan Pace's made a reputation for himself in being no stranger to trading away draft picks for either veteran players or future really draft day prospects that he's trading up to get. Of course, he did this maybe most notably in the Khalil Mack trade, which we can argue. I think maybe there's with that, in that case, you're getting an outstanding player, so it's maybe less dubious of a proposition to be giving away draft capital. But certainly in the Trubisky trade, trading away 3 picks to move up 1 spot is certainly a head scratcher at the time. Even short of knowing what Mitch Trubisky would turn out to be, and then certainly last season, I think that was the final straw for me, really, in the 2021 draft, where the Bears traded up 9 spots from number 20 overall to number 11 to draft Justin Fields. They also gave up their first round pick this year. So the Bears had a pretty poor showing this season at 6-11, which would be good enough for the 7th overall pick in this coming draft. And they do not have that pick. That pick resides with the New York Giants, which is just really insult to injury after a disappointing season. This is not a knock against Justin Fields. I think his career is still young. We've only seen, certainly it was a struggle this year. Hopefully he can turn it around next season. I don't wish any ill on him. Obviously, as a fan, I want to see him succeed. But as a GM, right, there's so much uncertainty around evaluating talent and evaluating college talent in the draft that you just have to have more humility around the price you're willing to pay for the guy you want, right? And I think most GMs would be wise to be more flexible on draft day and to have more respect for the uncertainty they have about these players and what they'll turn into. Ryan Pace had, it seemed like he would lock on to something he wanted and he'd pay through the nose to get it. And unfortunately, as fans of the franchise, as folks who are involved with the franchise on a longer time frame, they really suffer from that sort of short-term decision making. And now we're left here where the Bears really need to figure out what to do next. And something that would certainly be very valuable to them to help turn things around would be that number 7 overall pick, and it is gone. And Ryan Pace is gone with it. And so I think as fans, one sort of, I think, more informed way to think about any decision, like draft day decision, to trade away all of this draft equity, is to be very skeptical. To be very, very skeptical of the merits to doing that, because I think the incentives aren't good for the GMs. Oftentimes, I think in Ryan Pace's case, the writing was sort of on the wall that if things didn't really turn around this season, that he was likely to be out anyway. And I think a cynical take at that draft day trade in the 21 draft to get Justin Fields, a cynical take on that would be, hey, he's kind of mortgaging the future. And what does he care if things don't work out? If things don't work out this season, he's gone anyway. So who cares what happens to future draft picks? Which I think, if you're an owner out there listening, you really might want to think about that. Maybe put some guardrails or some checks and balances in the system for your GMs when that may be the case. Certainly, as a fan, we suffer for it, and yeah, it's just really disappointing. But I think more so than dogging Ryan Pace for any personal reason or anything like that, or any specific choice about signing this player or that player, I think really what I would want to focus on is just the analysis of those draft decisions, trading away all those draft picks, and was it really worth it? I mean, obviously, it didn't pan out. Trubisky, early returns are not good with Justin Fields so far. I guess we can talk about Fields next. He, was, I think, a highly touted prospect in the draft. I think there was a lot of hope and optimism, and frankly, it really was pretty disappointing this season. He went 2-8 in games that he started. I think it was definitely struggles. It was struggles, for most rookie quarterbacks this season, with the exception of Mac Jones. But yeah, certainly Trevor Lawrence has struggled. Zach Wilson has struggled. Trey Lance hasn't exactly set the world on fire either in his limited opportunity in San Francisco. So for Fields, it's certainly, I think, he's amongst the lowest performers or worst performers at quarterback in the NFL. You really hope he can turn it around. I don't think the Bears honestly have much flexibility with what they can do with him. Maybe I'll be wrong there. It'll be interesting to see what the future coach and GM decide to do with that situation. I imagine that they're going to hold on to him and sort of write it out. It's still only 10 games, so there's still more development that can occur there. And as a fan, I really hope they're able to turn it around and we're able to see him have a long successful career in Chicago despite the rough start.
So a lot of questions that really the NFC North with two of the 4 teams looking for a head coach and a GM. Then you've got Jacksonville, Las Vegas, still need to determine the fates of their head coaches who stepped in. Obviously, Vegas is in the playoffs. Jacksonville is not. I think Bisaccia has a better chance of staying than Darrell Bevel. In Jacksonville, Bisaccia, I mentioned, kind of struggled, dropped the Raiders and CCI from 6th through 9 weeks down at one point down to like 28th. They've moved back up over the last few weeks. He's been really good. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what they do with him. Obviously not a guy they hired to be head coach, but has, kind of led this team in a good direction over the last month or so into the playoffs. So we'll see there. As far as, there's always the question of the best available job opening. Currently, I mean, Minnesota, I feel like, has some pieces. They have a good offense. If Kirk Cousins is the man, it seems like he's been good enough, but never been, put a team over the edge, obviously. Chicago, you mentioned limited draft picks. The defense, has been pretty good at times, has some playmakers there. No really big name. Allen Robinson really struggled this year. Part of that, I think had to do with quarterback play, though. No matter who he's played with in his career, it seems like he's always been a producer. So it'll be interesting there. But I don't know. Minnesota, it seems like a good one. There's really not a lot else in that division, depending on what Aaron Rodgers does. If he stays, the Packers are going to be, the top team and the favorites there probably for the next 3-4 years, whatever it is. But Detroit could be, Dan Campbell, the team wasn't great this year, but being very aggressive if he can kind of get some more pieces there. But I don't know. I mean, out of these job openings, it's hard to say really what the best available one is, opinion wise. I said Minnesota seems to have a pretty good team in place. But in that division, depending on what Aaron Rodgers does, it's going to be tough to compete there every year. And maybe I think Denver actually, forgetting about Vic Fangio, if the head coach can bring in a good quarterback, I think they're set. Although they're still going to be competing with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, Justin Herbert and the Chargers, and then Derek Carr and the Raiders. So I don't know if any of these really stands out above any of the others for me, other than Denver, based on the roster itself, not considering the competition in that division.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that take on Denver, you have to realize the division they're in is, I mean, that's going to be
brutal.
It's going to be, yeah, it's brutal. It's going to be tough. And I think Minnesota to me seems like probably the easiest place where you can imagine a turnaround could happen pretty quickly. You come in there, you already have an established veteran quarterback, Kirk Cousins, who's pretty good. I think there's, I don't know that it's a certainty by any means, but certainly potential with the Aaron Rodgers situation that he's not even in the division next year. We'll have to obviously wait and see on that one. And then obviously your other two division foes are Chicago and Detroit. So looks pretty good. The one situation we haven't really touched on, and I think was the most surprising to hear about this morning, was Brian Flores in Miami. I think, based on how that team really rallied in the middle and end of the season, I think they strung together a streak of something like 7 wins or something like that.
And they had a 10-win season either last year or 2 years ago, but missed the playoffs. I mean, that's kind of that's not often that happens. So it's just one of those things you look at playoffs and they're like, oh, well, you didn't make the playoffs. But a 10-win season is good. So, yeah, that was surprising to me as well, though it seems like most people kind of saw that coming in the NFL circles. I don't follow it a ton as far as who's in and who's out, coach wise, but I'm with you that I was surprised there.
Yeah, pretty rough. I mean, I guess actually they lost 7 games in a row though at the start. I guess I didn't realize that. But certainly that's another situation that is interesting in that at times in the past, Deshaun Watson has been linked to in trade rumors to being headed towards Miami, or at least there being some chance of that.
Yep. And I saw this morning that one of the big reasons that he was interested in Miami was because of Brian Flores. So that could be no more now that he's gone, but it'll be interesting to see though.
Yeah, definitely. I in light of that, I didn't know that about Watson. And certainly there's a whole bunch of uncertainty surrounding that whole situation, obviously with his legal standing. And he sat out the entire season this year. So, well, obviously it's nothing but speculation at this point, but I think I was definitely a bit surprised to see Flores let go, this morning, and don't really know what's going to happen next with Miami. They're also in a division that, with Buffalo and New England, that's going to be pretty competitive, I think, most seasons going forward, obviously with the talent on both of those rosters. So, yeah, I guess back to the original question, I would pick Minnesota as probably the destination where a prospective head coach would find it most desirable and have the best chance at really turning things around quickly.
Yeah, and we kind of mentioning the comparative factor to Denver's got a better roster, I think, but the division, you're looking at a division with 2 young quarterbacks that's going to be tough for 10, maybe 15 years. Whereas you mentioned AFC North, NFC North, even if Aaron Rodgers stays, it's, 5 years max. Still, it's a long time in the NFL, especially when coaches are given, it takes, usually you're given 3 years to prove it. But yeah, I think that's a good pick there in Minnesota. So we'll see. I just saw it looks like Joe Judge is staying. Sorry, Giants fans. He's been rough, and I'm not sure if you all out there listening. So I think everyone actually has seen the 2nd and 11 and 3rd and 9 QB sneaks, where his defense was, I didn't want to have what happened last week against the Bears. I think they got a punt blocked or something, but that's not trying to win. That's trying to win a drive. If I don't even know if that's considered winning a drive. But he said, we punted and we're able to get the ball back. Well, they ended up punting again after that, I think, on their next 2 drives. So really just kind of a clown show. I don't know if we can say.
Yeah,
I guess
I'm glad you brought it.
What's been thrown around a lot.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Man, that would have been a bummer if we went through the entire show and missed that one. Yeah, that was just hard to see, right? I think, a lot is made of tanking, right? And, certainly in other sports, tanking has been a strategy that we've seen play out. And I think for the most part, I was pretty impressed across the league. I think teams, like the competitive integrity seemed pretty much intact across all the games. Like you said, we had Detroit beating Green Bay there when really it would have been in their best interest to lose. That obviously that Sunday night game turned into what could have been a disaster for the NFL. What could have been a disaster for the NFL turned into one of the most entertaining games in recent memory. Dramatic finish and just all sorts of, high entertainment value coming out of that one. And so, pretty much everybody across the league held up their end of the deal. And then you have the Giants. And man, that was brutal to see, especially because, some pregame comments made by Joe Judge to try to irk the other sideline. Of course, he comes out and does stuff like that. Kneeling or not kneeling, excuse me, but running quarterback sneaks on 2nd and long. It's pretty rough to see. Good for him though. I guess he keeps his job for now, and we'll see how that fan base takes that one.
Yeah, nowhere to go but up for the Giants. So we will see. There will be more to come. We'll have, I'm sure, a handful of more coaches let go today, and then in the coming weeks, maybe not in the coming weeks, I would imagine no playoff teams aside from perhaps Vegas will make a quarterback or a head coaching change. But we'll have updates from everything else that happens today on Wednesday with our coach ranking show. Katie, George, and I will be on there again, updating, talking through some of these coaches, looking at how they finish in our head coach rankings. So thank you all for joining us. We had a long one today. Looking at, we're coming up on an hour or over an hour and 15 minutes. So with 2 really good games, a lot to talk about. Those coaches just into the season. There's always just a little bit more to talk about heading into the playoffs. Excited for the playoffs to start. We've got 2 games Saturday, 3 games Sunday, and a game on Monday. Only the 3rd wild card game on Monday in NFL history. I think it'll be the 7th overall. And I believe from what I saw, I think it was like NFL Quirky Research, Twitter, all of those previous games came on the day after Christmas, all of those Monday playoff games between wild card and divisional games. So it'll be a big weekend, a lot of fun. So just want to remind you again, we will be back on next Monday, preview or recap either next Monday or next Tuesday. We're not sure. With there only actually being one Monday game, we might still have this podcast on Monday. We may wait for that Monday night game to finish, I think, depending on what happens over the weekend. I'll still be here on Thursdays with a betting preview for each round of the NFL playoffs. All of those shows can be found on our EdjSports Podcast Network or our EdjSports YouTube channel. Again, don't forget to review our show, give us 5 stars, help us grow our audience, and then remind you about our site and app where you can get pregame betting information. The app available for both iOS and Android. Get pregame betting insights for every game throughout the playoffs, and then obviously into next season as well. And then last but not least, Football Outsiders is currently running their special for FO Plus, their premium subscription. It costs you just 99 cents a week. Won't set you back too much, but those are for annual subscriptions only. It's a 99-cent a week total. So be sure to check them out over at footballoutsiders.com/subscribe. Scott, thank you for joining me as always, and enjoy the playoff action this weekend. It's finally here.
Thanks, Ian. You do the same. I'm looking forward to it. Have a good week.